Greetings, humanoids. Hey, it's Adam and Akbar coming at you with a lecture on ecomodernism. This is for both my social and political and my modern philosophy courses. And that's because ecomodernism is, I think, our reigning social and political philosophy. That is, it's the way we organize our society and think about our technologies, in particular, how we think about our relationship with the environment. So I think it's super important. As a social and political philosophy, I also think it's obviously all about modern philosophy. The idea with eco-modernism is that whatever modernity is, we can continue doing that, even though we understand that this is a finite planet. Um, we can keep on growing, basically. So that's why it's important, I think, for both classes. This will be less on carbon dioxide removal and more on this theoretical framework for thinking about that issue or any issue really related with the environment. I'm going to limit myself to 20 minutes, so let's jump into it. Okay, outline. Talk a bit about climate change. I'll try to just tell you ecomodernism in a nutshell, and then we'll see how it's an extension of modern social political philosophy. We'll spell out its vision, and then I want to give you some of the key pieces of ecomodernism in terms of the conceptual tools, the centrality of price, in particular decoupling. And then we'll end on this idea of the Kaya identity. Okay, so what is climate change? You've seen this graph many times. So this is an image of our CO2 emissions globally. They continue to rise, and they're doing so at a rapid rate, and really only got started in the mid-19th century, 20th century. And I've been making the case this is because modernity took hold. So my answer, how we got in this mess, is basically modernity. Right? In other words, a certain way of being in the world that took hold in Europe and North America and spread through colonialism and other mechanisms. Now, with eco-modernism, you say, how are we going to get out of this mess? More modernity. Okay, so I think eco-modernism is so interesting because it seems paradoxical. The very thing that caused our problems is the solution to our problems. Modernity got us into the mess, but modern innovation, economic growth is going to get us out of the mess too. Because it's not just a mess, okay? Climate change is the unintended consequence of human development. I've got a chart here, and this is a graph that just shows rising levels of human development on an index developed by the UN. And there's different ways to measure this, of course. This gets philosophical. What's a better or worse way of being in the world? What counts as development or progress? I think eco-modernism relies on a fairly straightforward, maybe non-controversial sense about, well, you're better off if you can live longer, if you can live healthier, if you have more education and opportunity, and more people around the world have that. And it's arguably because of the spread of modern technoscience and modern forms of social and political organization. So, what is eco-modernism in a nutshell? It's this. Okay, this is a quote from Schellenberger and Nordhaus. By the way, if you want to find more about eco-modernism, go to the Breakthrough Institute. That's probably your best place to go. And I forgot to say that eco-modernism, I think, is our default way of approaching environmental issues. But there's really very few people who explicitly theorize it, okay, like Schellenberger and Nordhaus do. So it's kind of our running program, our operating system, but it's very rarely sort of held for explicit reflection like we're doing now. Anyways, they say, look, the solution to the unintended consequences of modernity is and always has been more modernity, right? They say, for example, think about the ozone hole. How did we solve the ozone hole crisis? And we're still working on it, but it's getting better. Well, we didn't ask people to not use air conditioners. We didn't ask people to not have refrigerators. We found technological replacements for the refrigerants that were causing the problem, the CFCs. You have to think scale. That's the eco-modern's point. Imagine even if you could somehow convince all Americans to cut their meat consumption by 25%, or convince 25% of Americans to entirely cut their meat consumption. You'd save a lot of CO2 emissions, 82 million tons, but guess what? That's about 4 days worth of US emissions and 2 days worth of Chinese emissions. So we're not going to solve the problem by thinking about individual behavior choices. That's one of the, I think, key points of ecomodernism. Now, I'm going to throw a lot at you here that we'll have a chance to talk about more. But one of the things that Machiavelli said, who's this key figure in modern social and political philosophy, is don't try to perfect people, okay? The political project we're engaged in is going to go a lot better if we just take people more or less as they are. Forget about trying to make them better and just design systems that can absorb and control and deal with people's given desires, right? This is put colorfully by Matt Taibbi in the Rolling Stone, an essay about a year ago. The average American likes meat, sports, money, porn, cars, cartoons, and shopping. Less popular, socialism, privilege checking, and the world ending in 10 years. In other words, you're not going to get people to change. That's one of the key points of modern social and political philosophy. Take people as they are and deal with their desires through the structures you design. John Locke, another key figure. The reason we're here is to increase, that is to grow, not just in numbers of humans on the planet, but to increase our wealth, our convenience, to make life better, more comfortable. Locke said that nature is basically waste. It's only human labor that transforms it into value in terms of convenience. And governments are here to protect the growing wealth creation process. That's modern social and political philosophy in a nutshell. It's what we call capitalism, right, in a way. Everybody, Locke says, in a wealth creating society where human labor transforms nature into technological conveniences, everybody benefits. So everybody's better off in England, he says, than even a king in the New World, the Americas, because we have this wealth creation process. This is what he's saying. This is back in the 1670s or so. Ecomodernism is just John Locke, or you could say it's Locke 2.0. In other words, this basic process of ingenuity can continue even on a crowded planet. That's what we're trying to do. Okay, that's the whole game, is we're going to continue this process of innovation and growth. So to spell out the vision, eco-modernists are not Pollyannas. That's to say they don't just think there's a magic wand they can wave and there won't be problems. I mean, climate change is a problem. You know, there are environmental problems. We are probably not going to meet the 1.5 C degree target, and there will be suffering as a result, okay? But our future, because of modernity, is also going to have all these benefits. We're going to reduce hunger, we're going to reduce poverty. A wealthier future means we can adapt to a warming world better. More on that in a second. Wealthy people care about nature. Wealthy people can afford to mitigate their emissions. And this is proving true. So the so-called business as usual scenarios that are generated by the IPCC are turning out to be quickly outdated because we're really good at decarbonizing the economy because of green tech. So in the long run, we can turn the temperature down. Okay, this is an optimistic vision. If you haven't got that already, it's rose-tinted glasses, right? But it's not crazy to think we can do this, right? Even we'll be able to rewild vast areas of the planet through efficient agricultural systems, through efficient energy systems, right? Through urbanization, and through extraplanetary resource extraction and even colonization. We will eventually just zone Earth residential only. Okay, there's a lot of interesting visions, I think, that come out of economics. One of them is theological. For those of you interested in that, this, I think, social political issues, and we're seeing this in modern philosophy too, always have this theological undertone, right? Religion is always in the mix one way or another. And the point with ecomodernism is these traditional environmentalists, they say, are all these pessimists that have this eco-theology about sinfulness and hubris and transgression, and we've got to limit ourselves and scale back and slow down, right? we're defiling Mother Earth or something like that. But the eco-moderns say, no, we're doing what we do best. Humans have always used their intelligence to control their environment. The things we figured out with modern social and political philosophy and modern science is how to do that better. And as we do that, we're really humanizing ourselves, right? We're more human when we have medicines, when we have running water, when we have temperature controls indoors, when we have clean cooking fuels. We can do more things. We can be more human. And that means this is about dignity, right? Here's a little slide. Just this has two images on it. It just shows you the potential here for decarbonizing the economy. When you look at solar energy, it's going crazy. And some people have this thing called, I didn't put it here on the slide, but the solar dominance hypothesis, that we are on the cusp of a radical and very fast change in the way we produce energy on this planet, because there's more solar energy striking the Earth in 2 hours than the globe needs for an entire year. We just got to figure out how to do this, and we're starting to figure it out. Look at the prices of PVs coming down. These are the sorts of trends that eco-moderns would highlight. Price is essential. So I'm using the work of a guy named Julian Simon. He was an economist. He was one of the founding figures of what has become eco-modernism. Julian Simon is like Locke 2.0. It's really interesting. I'll talk about it later sometime. But he just said scarcity means an increase in price. That's all it means. And so a price increase signals to innovators and investors to find alternatives. This is basically Locke's logic for human labor. We go out, we encounter a problem, we use our brains to figure it out. Two examples, copper. Copper gets more expensive. What do? Well, we innovate alternatives. We have fiber optic cables, or we have, what's that called? PEX pipes for homes, water installation. Fracking is another example. It gets harder and harder to extract oil and gas. Well, we find new methods for making it easier. That's what we do. So the question here philosophically is, if this is all about price, how do we determine the price? Okay, that's not actually naturally determined. Things don't come out of the ground with a price tag on them. What is the real cost of a gallon of gas? What's being taken into account, and what should be taken into account to get that price to reflect the real costs and benefits of whatever we're doing? And so I think the trick for the eco-moderns is to get the signals right, to get the right price signal to indicate to markets and innovators and entrepreneurs and investors what to do. And that will entail government involvement. This is not like a laissez-faire libertarian philosophy. It relies on markets, but the markets have to be steered by governments because they got to get the price right. And this can happen in a lot of ways. I put BlackRock here, a huge investment firm, super wealthy. They are pushing now CEOs of all the companies to account for climate change in their business plans. And that's, I think, a game changer. And that's consistent with what the eco-moderns are saying is, if you can get people to start accounting for the true costs of their business, then you can make progress. Okay, now I'll finish up here last 5 minutes. Key concept. If there's two things to take away from this talk, one is eco-modernism is this idea that modernity causes our problems, but it also solves them. Okay. Two is probably decoupling, because this shows you kind of how it works. So this little graph, this is sometimes called a Kuznets curve, after an economist named Kuznets who was working with Julian Simon. And you look, what happens is, as we develop, for a while, the environment indeed gets worse. It gets worse. There's more air pollution, water pollution. But we get smarter and smarter and wealthier and wealthier. And eventually we innovate regulations and people just start caring more. They have the time and the money to care for the environment. And we turn a corner that's called peak impact. And then we decouple economic growth from an environmental degradation. So if you see that line, it keeps going. We keep growing our wealth, but we do it in a way that's delinked from or decoupled from negative environmental consequences. One example, London. This is a little chart at the bottom. I'm just showing you the city of London. In 1952, there were 200 micrograms per cubic meter of this particulate matter. So this is a form of air pollution. And the GDP per capita was $11,000. In 2015, air pollution is way down and GDP per capita is way up. That's it. That's decoupling. That's the recipe, not just for London and it will be Beijing, right? That's a recipe for the planet. That's what the eco-moderns are saying. Okay, last two slides. This is the Kaya identity. And I wanted to just introduce it to you because I think it's a really powerful tool for thinking about climate change. And it is an identity because what it's saying, you see the C, let's see if I don't know if you can see my little arrow here. The C on the left just means carbon in the atmosphere. Carbon in the atmosphere is a product of population, P, wealth per population, so GDP per capita, the energy, the amount of energy it takes to create that wealth, and the carbon it takes to, or the carbon that's in that energy. So the last two are, that's energy intensity, the amount of energy it takes for 1 unit of economic growth. So you can reduce that through efficiency. And then the last one's carbon intensity, the amount of carbon per unit of energy. And you can reduce that in a number of ways. Solar panels, wind turbines, maybe versions of carbon dioxide removal. The point with the moderns, and the reason I put a red box around this, or let me put it this way. You could get carbon, so the C on the left, we want to control that. That's the anthropogenic amount of carbon that we're putting in the atmosphere. We could make that zero if we made population zero, right? Zero times all this stuff would be zero. In other words, we wiped out the human population. We'd be done with, there would be no anthropogenic carbon emissions, right? We could also make it zero by making wealth zero. So just make everybody extremely impoverished. Well, that would take care of emissions, right? But one of the points of eco-modernism is that those are not viable options. Now, I happen to think there's ways through education, for example, to reduce population growth. But they have a really strong point, I think. Really? Are you going to make people less wealthy? And you think that's a viable social and political platform? No, they're saying the only thing we really have are these two levers here. We can either make the economy more efficient in terms of energy consumption, and we can do both of these, and we can make our energy less carbon intensive. And that's it, right? These are the levers we can pull to solve climate change. Okay, last slide. This is from the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And it takes that Kaya identity a little bit simplified. So here you have CO2 emissions. That's the C that was on the left. CO2 emissions are a product, they say, of three things. They don't even include population here. They have wealth per population, GDP. They have energy per GDP, that's the energy intensity, and they have CO2 per energy, that's the carbon intensity. But then look, they break this down. This is interesting. I hadn't seen this until I was researching for this talk. They say CO2 per energy can be broken down by this extension. You have the carbon intensity of fossil energy, and you have the fossil share in energy. This one, fossil share in energy, can be broken down by technologies. Look at this, solar and wind. That reduces your fossil share of energy. In other words, you get your electricity instead of from coal, you get it from a solar plant. Bioenergy, BECCS we've talked about, which is bioenergy plus carbon capture and sequestration. So you burn some sort of bioenergy, and then you capture the carbon coming off of that energy generating plant. And then look, they have others. I put nuclear on the side because nuclear is a huge option for reducing the fossil share in our energy. And then here you have carbon intensity of fossil energy. You can fuel switch. So going from coal to gas does reduce the carbon intensity of our energy. You can also carbon capture and sequester right off of a coal-fired power plant, for example. Okay, one point is, I don't know where direct air capture of carbon is in here, but the bigger point is This is the way eco-moderns think. Is like, what actually are our viable political options? And it turns out all of them involve more innovation, more economic growth, and guess what? That's modernity, right? So modernity gets us into the problem. Modernity will solve it for us. That's eco-modernism. I'm out of time. Until next time, may the force be with you.